we're going to be talking about regional and national youth-friendly policies. And then after that, I'm also just going to talk very quickly about engaging with elected officials and what are some of the do's and don'ts, what are some of the mechanisms that we need to understand. But just to set a bit of a background for this and why it is important for us to have this conversation around regional and national youth policies. I know the topic says youth-friendly policies, but basically I'll be looking around youth policy, youth-related legislation, and why these are very important for us around civic engagement that we'll be doing. Recently, countries have started to adopt youth policies as a way of providing a framework for the way that they engage with young people. And it just helps to guide, and also you can monitor and evaluate your engagement with young people, either nationally or regionally or internationally, globally, so to speak. We have various youth policies, youth-friendly legislation that we can be looking at. So I'm just going to have a conversation around regional, national, even maybe some international youth policies as well. So basically, why do we have youth policies, and what's the importance of these youth policies? Basically, a youth policy is created to ensure that young people are able to enjoy some fundamental rights and their freedoms in a country. And young people are seen as a special group. Sometimes they're seen as a marginalized group. And within our society, when we talk about marginalized groups, many times we refer to youth, to women, and to persons with disabilities. So that's why there are specific interventions, many times targeted at young people, targeted at women, targeted at persons with disabilities, towards ensuring that they can enjoy their rights and their freedoms fully in any country or in any society. But in order to ensure that we have youth-friendly policies, to ensure that legislation or policy is youth-friendly, it is vital to ensure that young people are involved in all stages, from development to implementation to monitoring and evaluation. So whether this is for a national youth policy or for a more global youth charter, and I'll be talking about some of these instruments later in my presentation, it is very important because one of the slogans of this program is called "Nothing About Us Without Us," and I think that just speaks to the fact around ensuring that there's a meaningful youth dialogue, ensuring that there's meaningful youth participation in the process of formulating the policy design, policy implementation, and then as well as monitoring, evaluation, and review of the policy subsequently to say, what are the gaps? Probably to ask the question around what did we do well, probably what didn't we do so well, and what can we work on some more in the future. But just to give a bit of a background, and that for a few years now, there's been a lot of attention to youth policy and youth programming. And this goes back as far as 1998, when there was a World Conference for ministers responsible for youth affairs. And at that conference, those ministers committed to ensuring that there's youth policy formulation and that implementation and follow-up processes are at appropriate levels, that resources are committed to ensuring that youth policies are formulated, implemented, and there's a follow-up. Before that, the conference had also demanded that there should be a formulation of youth policies in all the states. And when I say states in this context, I'm talking about nation states. So every country should have a youth policy by the year 2005 and ensure that these youth policies are cross-sectoral, they are comprehensive, and they are formulated with a long-term vision to ensure that these youth policies take into consideration all everything that affects young people, to ensure that it cuts across various sectors. You're talking about rural youth and urban youth. You're talking about educated youth and uneducated youth. Because as much as we talk about youth as a homogeneous category, we're actually more of a heterogeneous category, and there are many different classifications of youth when we're discussing issues about how they affect young people. Another important thing that we need to discuss in talking about youth policies and youth-friendly policies or youth-focused legislation, however we want to talk about it, is that many times these policies, and even speaking from our own experience with the national youth policy that we have in Nigeria, it is seen as many people call it a weak document because it is not legitimized by parliament. It is not backed up by law. And if anyone is a student of law, student of politics, you would understand many times the distinction that is made between law and policy. And so there's a difference, and law is more legitimized. It's a more legitimate instrument. Usually, there's an act of parliament, so a bill is passed before it becomes a law. And as we start to do advocacy around youth policy and youth-friendly legislation, it's important that we get the full participation of young professionals, civil society, youth organizations in designing and implementing of these policies. Because when young people are involved only in the design but not in the implementation, this is a limitation. And designing these policies must adopt a participatory model such that decision making is shared between decision makers and young people. The point here basically is the design, the implementation of youth policies must be seen as an inclusive process, so that young people feel some sort of ownership to what is going on with their policy. In 2013, only about half of the countries in the world had a youth policy, so to speak. About 28%, representing about 56 of those countries, were reviewing their existing policies. And I'll talk about reviewing youth policies as a means of engagement and how young people can get involved with this. But as of 2003, about 43 countries did not have a youth policy. But for us, we can look back and be happy that we have a national youth policy, and I would also speak about it. If you listen to my last session, one of the things that I always encourage people when I have an opportunity to speak to a group like this is to make that case around building your capacity. And one of the easiest and simplest ways to do this is by accessing material relevant to the work that you're doing, reading it, understanding it, doing an analysis. So if I would just ask, and you can answer in the chat box, how many of us have seen or have a copy of the National Youth Policy and have read it? It would just be nice if you can just answer in the chat box. You have the youth policy. Have you read the policy? Okay, so I like Mohammed, I said no, and Ibrahim, who is my namesake as well, I say no, they have not seen the youth policy. So I think one of the things I'll do after this presentation is to share a copy of the National Youth Policy, but only if you promise me that you're going to read it. I would share a copy of the youth policy with the team, and I'm sure the team would share that with you. But I don't want to speak too much English, but just to give you a bit of a background, that youth policy is at different levels. So there's policy at the international level, there's policy at the continental or a regional level, and there's policy sometimes at a national level, at a more local level, such as a state level. And I'll also just mention some of that in my presentation as well before I end. But also some very important youth policy instruments that you need to be aware of. There's a World Program of Action for the Youth, which was adopted by the United Nations in 1995. And this program is this document is one of the documents that has helped to shape the development of national youth policies across the world. And while it was adopted by the United Nations, what other countries have done is to adopt it and then contextualize it and make sure that it responds to our own context. So the context of the youth policy in Nigeria would be different from the context of the youth policy in India, for instance, because there are different contexts. Young people there might also be dealing with different issues, and their own youth policy would address those issues. But on a global level, there's also the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And many of these SDGs target young people more than anyone else. At the continental level, the African Union, which is the continental organization that we belong to, also has an African Youth Charter. And there are provisions in the charter that talks about participation of young people. At a more regional level, so across West Africa, there's the ECOWAS Youth Policy, which was adopted in 2009 and also promotes participation of young people at a regional level. And then at a more national level, we have the National Youth Policy. So what I've just tried to do is to break it down from a more global understanding of what some of these youth policy instruments are, and then to bring it down to a continental level, talking about the African Union's African Youth Charter, and then break it down a bit further to the regional level, and then to a more national level. And you might be asking yourself, why is this important? It's important to know this because you never know the different stakeholders that you might have to engage with. You might be starting in your states, and when you go to do your advocacy, it enriches your argument when you say, oh, according to the National Youth Policy in so and so, this is what needs to be done. But you could also be engaging and be doing advocacy at a more regional level, at a more continental level, and you need to understand what is contained in these various policy instruments for those different levels. Sometimes you might just be writing an article or creating a document, and you just situate the problem and the solutions within these youth instruments that I have mentioned. Again, the ones that I have access to, I would share in an email later on, and I'm sure the team at Leadtots would share it with all of the participants. So for those who said they have not seen what the National Youth Policy is, it looks something like this. So this is the front cover of the National Youth Policy, which is currently the National Youth Policy for between 2019 and 2023. But one of the very interesting things about the National Youth Policy is that there's a section for review, and it says that the National Youth Policy shall be reviewed every 5 years, I think. Why this is important is that it means for young people It means that for young people, it's an opportunity for you to engage. So if the national youth policy is not, if the national youth policy is not meeting your context and what you need to do, then there's an opportunity for you to review the youth policy and to engage with the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development, either by sending a memorandum or sending what you think should be included in the review of the national youth policy. At the state level, for instance, now, one thing that we've seen is many states are passing what is called a Youth Development Commission bill. So for instance, in Kogi State, the bill has passed. In Akwa Ibom, the bill has been passed by the State House of Assembly, but hasn't been ascended to by the governor. And I think also in Enugu State and in Nasarawa States, they are currently bills before the State Houses of Assembly for the passage of the Youth Development Commission bill. As we engage, and my next session is going to talk about that a bit more, on how to engage with elected officials, especially. These are opportunities for engagement. So regardless of which state you are in, whether you're in Adamawa or Bauchi or Borno or Yobe or Taraba or Gombe, there are opportunities for you to engage with your state houses of assembly. And if they do not even have the capacity to pass these bills, you can work with partners, for instance, to draft a bill that would address some of the challenges young people currently face in your state. I know that there's another session coming up that discusses some of the issues. So this just gives you some kind of background or insight into what is currently going on and what are some of the areas and some of the avenues for engagement. As I start to conclude, youth policies or youth-friendly legislation are different across the world in terms of the structure, the thematic areas, implementation, evaluation. So just because something has worked in one country, it does not mean that you can cut and paste and paste into our own context and it would work. There's also always going to be some variations. At an international level, like I said, there is no clear guidance on how exactly youth policies should be formulated or what should be contained in youth-friendly legislation. But there are some principles and components and themes that should exist. And as we look across various regional bodies, as research has shown us, as youth practitioners do their work, and as well as the international, many times we've signed on to as a country. These give us a good idea of what are the principles, what are the components, what are some of the themes that should make up these policies and this legislation as well. So that's the end of first presentation. I said it was going to be brief. I will not take too much time. So I don't know if we're going to vote on whether we should go into the next session, and then after that we'll take all the questions together, or if you have questions for this session, then we can take those questions now. And then I'll go into the second session, and after the second session, we'll take some.
Okay.
So, moderator, are we taking questions now, or are we going to just go into the next session? Then...
Okay. So, are you there? Yes, yes, I am. Hello, can you hear me?
Over, sir. Over.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, sir.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, okay, okay. Mr. Farouk, well done for that amazing presentation. Thanks, Mr. Elam, for taking it up for me. Okay, Mr. Farouk, you can go on with the next presentation. You can just go on, continue.
Okay.
Then
Uh,
I want to encourage you to put down your questions. I believe you might have several questions. I also want to tell you uh, to take advantage of the chat room. If you have some questions or some concerns, you can put them down. After the session, Mr. Farouk will take 5 minutes or so to go through the questions on the chat room before he concludes. Please go ahead, sir.
okay. Thank you very much. So I would share my second presentation very quickly. If you don't mind, just give me about 2 seconds to be able to share my screen. And I hope you can see it now. And I can see one of the comments said it was very brief, succinct. Thank you for that. I'll try to keep the presentation brief, so that we can all understand it as much as possible. I'm also definitely going to be sharing my slides, the presentation with the organizers after this, so that you can go back after it and read the presentation. And if tomorrow you're also called upon to give a presentation, you have permission to take from what you have learned, and share the learnings with some other people as well. But so just very quickly now, we're talking about engaging candidates and elective officials on youth-friendly policies. And the first session just laid the background as we understand what some of these policies are. But also beyond that, it's very important for us to understand how to engage. Because I know Leadtots and the work that they do. And after this training, you're definitely going to have to engage either with elected officials, or civil servants or public servants, and maybe identify an issue and advocate around that issue, influence policy or influence change one way or another. And in order to do that, there are a few basics that everyone needs to understand when you're going to be engaging, when you're going to be conducting some of these engagements. But just to set a background, like I usually do, is that in understanding democracy, and I'm sure that throughout this training, you've heard a lot about what democracy is and what democracy is not. But you might just need to come to this session with the understanding that democracy is about people. And if you ask me to summarize all the English that we have on our screen, it is very simple in a few words. It's that democracy is about people. It is the people who put elected officials into office, and our officials are accountable to those who elected them. Because elected officials derive their legitimacy from the people, from their constituencies, from those who put them into office. So if you listen to the members of the Senate or the House of Reps or House of Assembly, you always hear them when they introduce themselves, for instance, say, I represent the good people of Alkaleri Federal Constituency, or whatever constituency it is that they represent. And this is because, like I said, elected officials derive their legitimacy from the people. But why, to ask ourselves the question, why should we engage with candidates or elected officials? And when I was looking at the topic for today, I said there are some questions that we have to ask ourselves as we set the stage. And this is also going back to understand that, unfortunately, many elected officials are not accountable to anybody else. It is common for many times when our elected officials either go to the state capital or come to Abuja, they forget to build a bond with their constituencies. And it is almost as if they wait until it is another election season, and then they now come back and try to engage. But election is not a process. Elections is not just what happens on election day when you go to cast your ballot. Elections are a process. So what you do after election day, how you engage with your elected officials, or how you engage with candidates before they get into office, is very important. And these engagements help to put candidates or elected officials on their toes to ensure that they perform the various functions that they have been elected or they are seeking to be elected to perform. I've said, and I'm just going to speak about it very briefly, to say it is important for constituencies to engage with their legislators or elected officials or candidates who are seeking elections for the following reasons. Elected representatives or candidates need to have an understanding of the needs and priorities of their people. This is very important because many times candidates or officials believe that they know what the people need more than what the people actually need. And this has led to a misplacement of priorities or a misplacement when it comes to allocation of resources. The needs of a community or a constituency or a people might be schools, for instance. But however, the elected officials are providing hospitals and providing water when these are not the needs. So while those things may be important, they may not be the priority of their community or their constituency at that time. Secondly, it will also enable constituents to get first-hand briefings from their elected officials on policy and legislation. It's important that when you send a representative either to the state capital or to Abuja to represent you, you want to know what is happening. You want an account of your stewardship. If anyone has children or is planning to have children, you know that you send your children to school, and at the end of the term, they come back and give you a report on how they have performed so far. And that is the same principle about getting first-hand briefings on policy and legislation. It's also about ensuring that constituencies can make inputs, because we have a representative democracy. What this means is that not everyone can be involved in decision making, but we can have constituents and citizens make inputs into policy or legislation. This process of engagement also educates constituents on government policies. And if I can just give an example, I know, for instance, one time the government had a policy around what was called Ruga at that time, and about creating ranches for herdsmen and cattle rearers especially. And there was a lot of back and forth and support and opposition for the bill. But just imagine if the government had allowed citizens to make inputs into some of these policies and legislation. Citizens will be educated about the process, citizens' voices will be heard, and then all of that backlash and all of that opposition would greatly be reduced. There's also the conversation around legitimacy of those policies, how it also throws up more ideas. And just imagine many people bring their ideas, and that is what makes these ideas a lot better. And then finally, the people who are involved after you engage, you have a sense of ownership. Imagine you engage with an elected official and you say, oh, this is the kind of law I want to see passed. And he or she goes back and that law is passed. You're going to be one of the first people that defend that law, no matter what happens, because you have a sense of ownership. You know that you are involved in the process for that law or that policy or that program of the government. Now, I'm going to talk about what are some of the methods and tools of engaging with candidates and officials. And there are quite a few. I may not be able to explain all of them in depth because some of them are self-explanatory, but I'll just talk about them very briefly. So one is around make contact and build a relationship with the candidate or the elected officials. So candidates and elected officials usually have aides. So you may have a PA or a technical advisor or someone. You can find that person's number or that person's email address and reach out to them and start to build that relationship first, because they are the gatekeepers. They are the ones that will take you to Oga or to Madam's office. Some of them have constituency offices, especially for those who contested for office. And this might be an opportunity to go to the office, if the office exists, and find out who is there and start to build that relationship. And that brings me to the next point around visiting their office. So whether it's a campaign office, whether you need to go to the House of Assembly or the National Assembly or the civil service, visit that office and start to build that relationship with them. Another method of engagement is public petitions. So in almost every House of Assembly, there's a committee on public petitions. Right now with social media, and social media is one of the methods of engagement as well, is that there are ways to also write public petitions online. And what public petitions help to do, it helps to draw attention to that issue that you are engaging around. There's also using public hearings, and public hearings are usually organized by the government or by the legislature, so to speak. So when there's a bill that is being considered for passage, the National Assembly would hold a public hearing and ask people to come and make inputs. That is one of the ways and the methods for engagement. But then there are town hall meetings, and sometimes town hall meetings are different from public hearings because town hall meetings are usually organized by citizens, and then elected officials or candidates are invited to come and speak. And that's another way of engaging. Ceremonies and events. So many times people invite officials and sometimes for building that relationship, and I'll talk about that a bit later as well. We also have mass action. So things like protests and rallies can also be used to get attention and engage with officials. There's social media, and social media has become such an important tool and such an integral part of the way that we engage. So many elected officials now are on social media. Candidates use social media to canvass for elections. Government offices use social media to share information. And social media has provided that platform to engage as well. You can use publications, broadcast newsletters. You can write articles in the newspaper. Even if you want, you can do different types of broadcasts or produce a newsletter. Some assemblies have a magazine, for instance, and you can also use that to engage, and pass across what the issue is that you want to engage with that cohort as well. And from a lot of what I've been speaking about is one of the places to find the highest number of elected officials is in the legislature. So whether it is at the state level or at the national level, the legislature plays such an important role when we engage around issues for youth development, youth participation, youth empowerment, entrepreneurship, all those activities that are responsible for developing who the Nigerian youth is. In the National Assembly, for instance, if you are going to engage around issues affecting young people, you would be engaging mainly with maybe the Senate Committee or the House Committee on Sports and Youth Development. There's also, for instance, the young
Uncle Jay, sir, is the key to the black car? Is it something you have given back?
You need to mute your mic. But then, as I go ahead, the 1999 Constitution obliges that the legislature should involve the public in its activities and processes. That means the legislature, both at the federal and at the state level, also has a responsibility to ensure that they open channels for engagement around the work that they're doing. And young people need to be invited to take part in legislative activities and initiatives, such as public hearings, like I spoke about earlier. But you can also make your voice heard through oral submissions or written submissions, which are usually also a part of the public hearings or the town hall meetings when they are held. But I'm just going to also be speaking a bit about what you need to do when you're planning your engagements to ensure that you have a fruitful engagement or a successful engagement. One is to clearly define the purpose of your engagement. So are you engaging because you want to create awareness? Are you trying to propose solution? What is the change that you're trying to make? Or are you just trying to establish contact or build a relationship? So that's the first thing you need to do. Why am I reaching out? You need to state the purpose for the engagement. Secondly, is to come and understand what are the potential solutions. Because we're not just engaging for the sake of engaging. It's because there are challenges, there are issues that we're trying to solve. And again, I said, having been partners with Leadtots for so many years, I know the work that they do in many places. And trust me, after this training, you're also going to have to get to work. You need to understand what are some of the challenges that you face around whatsoever issue that you're advocating for or you're speaking about. Who are the key stakeholders? Who has the power to make things change? Or who are the key stakeholders that are preventing things from happening the way that you want them to happen? There's also a question around documentation. And so come ready with documentation that helps to buttress the point that you're making. Or a previous report from work that you have done. And my colleagues at Leadtots, I'm sure you know about this very well. When you engage, you take some materials, relevant documents, you leave them behind as a souvenir, so that after your engagement, whoever you're meeting with can also read that and understand. There's also a question around timing, and timing is very important for many reasons. Even if we just use the example today, ensuring that your engagements do not coincide with Jumu'at prayer, so as the case may be, and ensuring that the timing is convenient for both parties, but especially for whoever you're engaging with on that. And then finally is understanding the profile of the candidates or the elected officials, and this is very important because it helps to strengthen your advocacy. And many times we know the stories of young people. So take for instance, if you know that the elected official that you're engaging with was raised by his mother, and because maybe, for instance, his father died at a very young age, you know that that kind of official would be open to hearing you talk about issues of women empowerment. Because at the back of his mind, he's thinking of his mother and how she went through the process of raising him and his brothers and his sisters without any support. And he would not want other women to go through that. So he would be more sympathetic to that kind of engagement. So knowing how to target the right people, so to speak, with your engagement, so that they'll buy into it and support the work that you do. Very quickly, I'll also be talking about the do's and don'ts of legislative engagement or engagement with public officials generally. One thing you must do is plan, prepare, and practice ahead. Please don't think that you're the smartest person in the world and you do not need to prepare or you do not need to practice what you're going to say. Make sure you practice, you know what you're going to say very well before you go for any of these engagements. Secondly, is to be punctual. If they say come at 10 o'clock, please make sure you're there by 9:30. Even if you have to wait, it shows that you're serious about what you want to do. Dress appropriately. In some places you go to, you would have to cover your hair, for instance, since you're a woman, or you have to dress properly. You will not go for the engagement wearing your jersey and your short knicker. You need to dress properly, sometimes maybe even wear your cap so that they'll take you seriously. Be brief and concise. Many times other people are waiting. So just try and keep your engagement brief, straight to the point. Always start with introductions. Introduce yourself, introduce your team if you're working with other people. And also ask him or her that you're meeting to also introduce themselves or anyone else that they're working with. Be clear. Be clear about what you're saying. And I'll talk about that a bit later. Start and end with a so thank whoever you're meeting for their time, for agreeing to meet with you. And after the meeting or after the engagement, always remember to thank them again for spending time with you. Bring documents, and I talked about that previously. Observe protocol. So if there's a protocol for addressing who you're engaging or who you need to recognize first in the room, make sure you know what the protocol is and observe that protocol. And finally, always remember to follow up after the engagement. Now, these are some don'ts that you should not do when you're engaging. One, please don't come late because this can also just annoy some people and they'll not want to engage with you anymore. Secondly, is do not go unprepared. Sometimes it's even better to reschedule than to go for a meeting and you're not prepared for it. Thirdly, don't be hostile or combative. And because we need these people and they need us, you need to maintain that relationship. But coming with a hostile approach, as if you want to fight, will definitely a don't. Something you should not do. Secondly, do not tell lies, especially if you do not know the facts. If you do not know, there's no harm in saying, I don't know, I can find out and I'll get back to you. Another thing you should do, please, when you go for this engagement, do not request for financial assistance. You're not going there to beg for money. You're going there to engage on certain issues. And lastly, do not present too many requests. And I can tell you for sure that these are elected officials have so many requests every day. So if you come with your own one or two, make sure it is straight to the point, make sure it is clear, make sure you're there and you're adding value to them, not requesting for assistance from them. I'm sure they will be open to engaging with you some more. What are some of the challenges that we have so that I can wrap up very quickly as well and take questions? One, there's a lot of illiteracy and ignorance. And this happens on both sides. Even those of us who want to engage, sometimes we do not understand the process of making a policy or the process of making a law. And if we approach our engagement from that, would run into trouble. So again, my encouragement all the time is to build your capacity, read as much as you can, and understand the issues and how to engage. Another challenge is that there are rising demands on candidates and elected officials. So if you have a brother, an uncle, or a cousin, or an auntie who is an elected official, just ask them one day to show you their phone and the number of text messages that they receive, asking for one kind of assistance or one kind of demand on them. Let us not be the young people that are increasing those demands. Let us be the young people that are adding value to them instead. Another challenge we have is sometimes we have a lack of faith. We don't believe that our elected officials can get things done. But unless we engage and unless we try, we will not know. I've talked about financial requests, inadequate funds, but I'll also just like to talk about restriction of access. And because of some of the challenges that we are faced with security, especially in the Northeast, now even with COVID, it's not as easy to just walk into anybody's office and say, oh, I want to have a meeting, or I have a very brilliant idea that I want to share with you. So sometimes access can be restricted. But as we engage, remember I talked about how you can build and maintain those relationships, either through a family member, through someone who works in one of those offices, for instance. And there are many ways of making those connections and building those relationships. As I conclude, is just to say that at the center of policy making, decision making, at the center of legislation and what is required from our elected officials is the people, it is the citizens. So it's become very important that we are educated and that the weapon that we have is education and knowledge on how we can get involved in policy and legislative matters. Because of the high level of, maybe I should call it illiteracy or ignorance, we have left lawmaking processes, decision-making processes, policy-making processes to the hands of those we have elected without them coming back to ask the people who gave them the mandate and who legitimized them about what they think. And please, as I round up, I've actually come to the end of my presentation. It is to remember, if you don't remember anything else, is to remember it's about the people. That is what it is. The people are important. The people have the power. And let us always remember that everything we are doing is about people, the people that we're working with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farouk. We really appreciate this wonderful presentation. I would like to give 3 people opportunity to ask questions because of time so that we can move to the next facilitation that we have. So the next 3 people that will raise up their hand for questions, I will take questions. Are you hearing me? Hello? Hello? Okay, if there are no questions, we're going to move to the next presentation. And I want to believe that there should be questions so that we can get more enlightenment on the policy development. As we heard from the facilitator, it doesn't stop from just development and adoption of the policy, but also implementation.
Okay, someone is lifting up his hands.
Okay.
Okay. Samson.
Kifas. You can unmute and speak.
You can unmute and speak. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I want to first of all appreciate the presenter for this amazing presentation. I really feel empowered today, and I feel special as a youth. Yes, some of these things are actually initially before this very time, I don't even know about them. Yes, but thank God for today and thank God for the presentation. So the presenter has show us the process on how we can engage with elected officials or candidates. So I want to know if we want to have a meeting with them, are we sending an email or a phone call, or maybe we are going to request for that opportunity through someone very close with them, or how do we actually have or book an appointment with such people? Thank you. That's the question.
Thank you very much, Samson. And there are many different ways. So yes, you can, if you have their number, you can call, you can send a text and say, oh, I want to meet with you. When are you available? When and where can we meet? And let me just tell you something from some of my personal experiences that many times when you reach out to your elected officials the first time, they might not reply you, they might not respond. They might tell you they are busy. But don't give up and keep on sending those messages, keep on trying to call them. And the reason for this, I know is because many times they have people who are reaching out to them because they have requests. But when they know that you're not there to ask them for money, instead you're there to find solutions together, trust me, they will reach out to you and you'll start to build that relationship. If you don't have their number, you can look for someone who is close to them. And like I said, many times they will have a PA or someone who works with them that you can reach out to, and they can help you set up a meeting. From there, you can now start a personal relationship with the elected official by getting his number or her number. Some of them, yes, you can send via email. I know like Honorable Simon Carey, for instance, and we've worked with him as well. If you send him an email, you'll get a reply from him. So it depends. Don't just use one method of engagement. Use all the methods that are available to you that you can get until you can do what you need to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sampson. Okay, Sampson, you want to speak again? Okay, quickly, please be fast about it.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity once again. So, Sir Farouk, I just want to actually find out the more, because there was a time I was trying to write an article uh, based on the efforts and the achievements of one of our representatives here in Gombe. So when I reach out through the PA, one of his PA, the PAs actually, they're always giving people problems, like the protocols. They will tell you, okay, they are engaged. When you try to reach out, they will tell you, okay, call them by this time, all this bureaucratic process. So I think maybe the email can actually serve, but some of these PAs are not actually helping matters, sincerely speaking.
I agree with you. And sometimes the PAs are almost like the gatekeepers. They're the ones who decide who have access or who don't have access. But it's very important. Like I said, what is the purpose of your engagement? If you tell the PA that you're not here to ask Oga for money, you have an idea, you have a solution that you want to propose to him. Let me also give you another story around how somebody engaged. He had been trying to reach a certain elected official and he could not reach him. So what he did was he was a Sunday school teacher in his church, and the man's son was in his Sunday school class. And so what he did was to get some documents and he gave it to the man's son and said, "Oh, please give this material to your daddy and tell him it's your Sunday school teacher." So when the father saw that, he said, okay, this guy is serious. He found a way to get across to me because he tried to reach the PA, he tried to go to the office, he was blocked. But he definitely found a way to communicate and and get the message across. I can see some other questions. I think Javan, you're asking, are youth policies optional to the states? So for instance, there's the national youth policy. And if you say something is national, that means it's for all the states. But some states sometimes prefer to have their own state youth policy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you remember, a policy is not a law. And so that is why some states would prefer to sign a law establishing a youth development commission for that state, for instance. And so that's the difference. There's another question. It said most public office holders keep their contacts confidential. Sometimes they'll ward you off by security personnel because they are mistaking you for beggars. So if you remember when I talked about some of the do's and the don'ts, one of the things was to dress appropriately. You know, even the way they say the way dress the way you want to be addressed. You know, so that just means, you know, if you're well dressed, you're looking good, nobody will treat you like a beggar. And one of the reasons why they keep their contacts confidential is because of the many requests that they get. And many people who are contacting them are not contacting them because they want to help provide solutions. It's because they are there to ask them, oh, I'm looking for money to pay rent. I'm looking for money to pay school fees. So we also need to understand the challenges that they face. And when you understand those challenges, and I'm not saying that what they are doing is right, just so that we are clear, but that is the reality. And it's because of the challenges that they also face. And when we understand those challenges, we can now also engage them in a way that it helps to overcome those challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Farouk. Okay.
In some cases, their details are made public. So if you go on the National Assembly website, for example, you'll see the email addresses and phone numbers of some of the National Assembly members, and you can reach out to them. But just because there are challenges does not mean that we are going to give up. As young people, we're innovative, we're creative, we're resourceful, and we'll keep on reaching out until we find a solution for the challenges that we face.
Thank you, Mr. Farouk. Well done.
Thank you.
Once more, thank you for finding time to always share with us, despite your tight schedules and even short notice most times. We really appreciate it.
It's no problem, sir. I will share my slides and my documents as well as I promised.
Okay, that's fine. I will follow up on that.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Elam, over to you. I can see Barista already in the house.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sheldon. And thank you, Mr. Farouk, for this wonderful presentation. Quickly, I'm going to usher in our next facilitator, which is Barista Adina Garuba. If you are on, you can unmute yourself and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Hello. I am ready to go on now. I'm testing my audio, sorry.
Yes, it's okay, ma'am.
So, good afternoon once again. I'm glad to be here today again to try to give you a little I know about safe side. If I discover that my network is not good, when I notice it from here, I may have to switch off my video so that you can hear me better. All right. Can you view my screen now? Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it, ma'am.
So our topic once again is introduction to gender-based violence and effective advocacy for women and girls. Last week we started with some definitions and then we went offline, but let's, for the sake of maybe keeping up to date, let's start all over again. The slide is divided into two parts. We have the first part, which deals with gender violence, gender and gender. The second part deals with effective advocacy for women and girls. And the learning objective for the first part, that is the gender-based violence, is one. At the end of the lecture or the discussion, we should be able to understand the meaning of and differences between sex and gender-based violence. We should also be familiarized with the common definitions and terms that are associated with violence. To define violence, we should know its types and forms. At times, people mistake forms of violence and types of the violence. They use them interchangeably. But today, we will be able to know the difference of forms of violence, and we'll be able to differentiate it from types of gender-based violence. And then we should be able to define gender-based violence, and then we should be able to identify the forms of gender-based violence, the root causes of gender-based violence, contributing factors, and the consequences of gender-based violence in our community. Now, let's sex versus gender. I've heard many people use over time sex and gender interchangeably. However, these two terms are different. Whereas sex has to deal with the biological characteristics of a male and female, it has to do with our chromosomes, our genes, reproductive organs, and the reproductive functions. Like, for example, women can become pregnant and give birth and have breasts. They can't be able to breastfeed their children. Women menstruate every month. This all has to do with the sex. And it's biological in nature. We have no choice over it. It's natural. Men are the one that can make women pregnant. They are more strong because of their physique, the way they are. And they don't have protruded breasts like men. So all these are the biological aspects. That is the real definition of sex. Differentiation between a male and a female based on their biological characteristics. Gender is very different from sex in the sense that it describes the socially construed characteristics that are held by men and women, irrespective of their organic or biological differences. This means that gender are socially ascribed roles that are ascribed to both male and female, maybe based on our religion, based on our norms, etc. And there has to do with our roles and responsibilities in the community or society. That is perceived roles that are ascribed to a male or female because he is a male or female. So the difference thus is that whereas sex is universal, it's general, in every part of the world, it's the same thing, a male and a female. Gender, on the other hand, is not universal. It is something that is learned, and it is subject to change over time, and it varies widely within and between cultures. As let's take for instance a very good example. As a child, when you raise two children, male and female, the same way, without differentiating to say that the boy has the girl is supposed to learn things that only girls do, like cook or clean the house and the rest. Whereas the boy's role is to protect the girl, is to go out and earn a living and all this. They won't know the difference. So we've seen women that earn for themselves and take care for themselves, and we've seen men that cook. Okay, another good example is that, take for instance, cooking. We've seen male chefs that can cook more than women, better than women. If you go to most of the 5-star hotels and big restaurants, you see men heading the kitchen. They learned how to cook. So the fact that, so this debunks the myth that it's only women that should cook or women are the best cook. Cooking does not come naturally, it is learned. And then it changes over time. In the past, women are perceived to play a role in the homes only, not in office spaces, not in public spaces. But over time, we've seen women going into public spaces. We've seen men coming into the private spaces in the home, taking care of children and helping to cook, not helping, contributing to the family by cooking. Because when you say helping, it means that he's doing a favor. When you say he's contributing, it means that he's trying to play his role in the family as one of those that are stakeholders in the family. Yeah, so now it is changing. Women are going out to work and earn for the family too. And then gender varies from culture to culture. That is to say that the beliefs we have about women varies from culture to culture. The beliefs we have about men changes from, or the roles, ascribed role to either of the sexes changes from culture to culture. For example, let's see, which example can I use now? Okay, I know in some cultures in Nigeria, women are not allowed to sit in council meetings. Like when you talk about, let's use the pre-colonial period. I think all of us studied social studies, or most of us studied. When we study about pre-colonial period, we discover that in the north, that politics and community leadership is more dominated by men. But you go to the south, women are perceived, in the north, women are perceived to like perform more role, be more active in the family. Whereas in the south, you have women playing dominant, especially in the east, women playing dominant role in community, in leadership in the community. We have market groups, we have women age grades, we have women groups and different types of groups that women belong to, playing several roles in the community. So whereas gender changes from one community to another, sex does not, it is universal. So the last time I asked a question, I asked if some of us can type in the chat boxes what beliefs, what gender roles or ascriptions do we give to men and women in our community, that is in our culture, that is different from other cultures. For instance, let me say maybe in my culture, I'm Idoma by tribe. So in my culture, in those days, women are perceived, the man bring the food stuff like yam. He farms food stuff like yam. He farms food stuff like maybe cassava and other things, and bring it home. Whereas the woman, and then he brings the meat too, for putting in the soup. Whereas other ingredients that are used in the soup is perceived that it's a woman's role to look for it. So if it's obolo or egusi or even fish, men hardly bring fish to the house. They feel that fish is something that if they cannot, if the man does not bring meat to cook, to put in the food that day, the woman has to struggle and put fish. So you see every woman having fish stocked and dried at the fireside as a fallback on in case the man does not bring the meat. And then some in my culture, when there is food and a woman or any food utensils, the woman crosses over it, the husband can no longer use that utensil. If you cook and you put the food on top of the stool, the kitchen stool that the woman sits on to cook in the kitchen, the man can no longer eat that meal or use that cooking utensil. And then of course things like the liver, things like part of different parts of meat. There are different parts of meat that are ascribed to the men. It's meant purely for men. For instance, when you talk about liver in even chicken, when you talk about liver in any meat, when you talk about gizzard, when you talk about the heart and other things, it's men that eat it. Women do not eat it. So those kind of things. So yes, I can see some in charts here. I see family inheritance. Yes, so when you say family inheritance, you did not tell us the difference, how it is different from other culture. What is it that women are not allowed to inherit, or is it only women that inherit? For instance, in my community, two women do not inherit land, but now women buy the land. And sometimes they have to use their son's names or something else to buy the land, or a brother's name. With the women don't inherit land. The men hold it for the farm, so you have to go and ask. So I can see that the men don't pound yam in my community. You see, this is very different. In my community, it's men that pound yam, women don't pound yam. So even when a woman is cooking and there's no male in the house, any man she sees passing around, she'll call, please come or help us pound this yam. And when the man finish pounding it, they'll say, please stay and eat. Now the man will say, no, I'm in a hurry, and goes, because you'll be termed as somebody that is greedy if you stay behind to eat the meal that you have suffered to pound. Then men don't cook, only women cook. You see, that is a fallacy too. And then we have another one here. Women don't inherit land and farmland, same as my culture. Then Samson, in my culture, women are not allowed to slaughter anything. Yes, in my culture too. Unless there is no man in the home, women are not allowed to slaughter anything. If you want to slaughter, you look for a man to come from anywhere. You can look for a stranger passing to come and slaughter. Yes, it's true. In my culture, that's the same thing. So it means that we now understand the difference between gender and culture, right? So let's go to the next slide. Now we are going to talk about some concepts before we go into the lecture on gender proper. We are going to talk about equality, we are going to talk about gender justice, and we are going to talk about equity. Now, when we talk of gender equality, because if we don't understand what gender equality is, how do we talk about gender-based violence? It's when you understand what gender equality and you understand justice and equity, then you'll be able to understand that something is wrong in the way women are treated in the community. When you understand the concept of equity and equality, and then you see that this concept is not being practiced in the community, you know that something is wrong. And if it is not being practiced solely on the grounds of the gender of the person involved, you know that something is really, really wrong. That is when you start asking yourself, what is the thing that is wrong? What type of gender-based violence is being practiced? So gender equality means the absence of discrimination on the basis of sex in terms of allocation of resources, opportunities, and access to services. So the fact that I'm a woman or the fact that you're a man should not be a basis that will be denied certain things like the allocation of resources, or maybe employment opportunity, education opportunity, or even access to certain services. So that is what gender equality is all about, that everybody is equal, they should be treated equally. Now let's look at gender justice. Gender justice just means justice in the distribution of the resources. So you want to practice gender equality, but you take it a further step to make sure that you are just in the distribution of resources and responsibilities between women and men. You know, we all have different roles to perform in the community. I know that there are certain things that women can do that men cannot do, and there are certain things that men can do that women cannot do. But there are other things that, well, irrespective of the sex of the person, we can all do it. A woman can do it, a man can do it. So we should be able to distribute such resources, the available resources and responsibilities between men and women without any form of discrimination, that is justice. Then now equity. Equity takes further the concept of gender equality and gender justice. It takes it further in the sense that it recognizes the difference in the needs and strengths of women and men, and that there is a difference that should be identified and treated to resolve the imbalances between the sexes. It recognizes, now, what equity means is, in some area, women are more active, like it recognizes the strength that women bring to the table. It recognizes the strength that men bring to the table, and then look at it and allocate resources accordingly. Let me give you a good example. I like using myself as an example, and I think that is why some of the advocacies that have run so far have made the type of success they have, because they are all based on experience. I don't know if maybe all those that are here are working, or some of you are working, but I want you to start thinking and look around, not just, let's start with our community, Bauchi. Go to each of the public space that we have, the Bauchi State Secretariat, Bauchi State Judiciary, go to the police station, go to even the hospitals, the teaching hospitals, the specialist hospitals, go to the Federal Secretariat. Go around and look at it, whether it is gender sensitive. That is when you know whether equity has come to play. Yes, gender equality, we are trying to get there. Women are feeling some, are being given the opportunity to go to places like occupy positions that they have the capacity, irrespective of their gender, to be able to fill. But what about equity? Equity means you take into cognizance my strength as a woman and my weaknesses, and you make allocations to address those differences between me and the other sex. If you go to our workspaces, it is masculine in nature. It is not feminine. It's not gender sensitive. Why do I say that? We understand that most women that go to work, that start work in most corporations, maybe between the ages of 25, let's just use 25 as an example, 23 to 40. Those are the times that we are most busy in our workplaces, right? And for women, we know that that is the time that between that ages 25 or 23 to 50, maybe 45, is the time that is our childbearing age, the time that we really need to have a family and take good care of them. And our clock is ticking. And then we have to make sure that we give our best in the office. That is not gender sensitive. And then give our best at home. Why do I say it's not gender sensitive? Because there are no facilities put in place to address the fact that women have certain needs. We still have to look after, some women are breastfeeding babies. They have small big children. They don't want to live with just virtual strangers, but there is no arrangements or facilities to encourage women to work without thinking about the families that left behind. No child, how do I put it? Is it crèche? No daycares in our workspaces. No changing rooms, like how do I put it? Comfortable changing rooms that you can say, okay, I'll take my child there and change the diapers and everything. No private spaces are provided that you can say, okay, you go there, breastfeed your child and leave your child there and come back to the office and continue with your work. After 30 minutes, 1 hour, you go take 5 minutes break, go and look after your child and then come back. So that's why I'm saying that equity has not been done in that aspect. Now let's look at a good example of equity. I've given a normal example, maybe a physical example based on my experience in my workplace. And of course, in some of the workspace, they tell you that you shouldn't bring your child to work, so you become very demoralized. But if you have these workspaces, if the workspaces are gender sensitive, it will be such that it will have all the resources that encourage, that is family centered. So if the woman cannot come to our workplace with a child, even the man can decide to take the child that is like 2 3 years, 2 years that have not started school, to his own workplace while the woman is looking after the one that is like 3 months or still suckling. Look at another example of equity. Take, for instance, there's a family of a father, a mother, and their child. The child is just like 5 years old, so he's not even up to waist height of the father. The mother is not as tall as the father, so maybe just below the father's shoulder. And then there is a fence between them and a football pitch. And on the football pitch, they are playing ball. Now, the fence is high, but it's not as high as the father's shoulder or neck. So the father, if he stands, he can see what is happening at the football field. The same thing too, the mother, if the mother stands, he can see what is happening at the football field, because maybe the fence is just at her chin level, but the child cannot see what is happening on the field. Now, if we want to look at equality, what will happen? And there are three boxes available. Equality says we should divide the 3 boxes equally amongst them. Give the father 1, give the mother 1, give the child 1. Now, if the father stands on one of the boxes, he becomes too tall. The fence will be at his waist level. If the mother stands on her own box, she becomes tall, and the fence is at her bust level. However, when the child stands on the box, he can still not see what is happening on the other side. Now, equity means you look at their needs. If the father takes his box and adds his to the son's box, the son can see if he stands on tiptoe. And if the mother takes her own box and adds it to the son can stand, and the fence will be just below his shoulder, which means he can see comfortably. So all the 3 boxes, if given to the child, the 3 of them will be able to stand comfortably and see what is happening on the football pitch. That is called equity. You recognize the weaknesses and needs of each of the 3 parties, and you distribute the resources effectively. So before we go to the next slide, so that you understand what I mean, because we talked about gender versus sex, right? And we said that gender roles and the way we treat the community are linked. So let's look at video so that it will bring it into us before we go to the next topic.
From that, girls and boys, women and men are expected, women and children out of poverty, not to mention the chance of a just and fair world. From that, girls and boys, women and men are expected by society to play certain roles and behave in certain ways based on traditions, religion, and other beliefs. These behaviors are learned and shape the gender norms in society. Unfortunately, in many countries, gender norms create disadvantages for women. Often, girls are not sent to school. When they become women, they then have limited ability to earn money or realize their potential. Rural women play a major role in agricultural development. However, in many developing countries, women cannot farm in their own land. Without land, they cannot get loans to invest in their farms or businesses. This also means they have no control over the use of land or the benefits that come from it. Men generally control the household decisions, like how to use the family's assets. These disadvantages are often reinforced by practices that limit women's access to services like training. Cultural beliefs can also restrict women's opportunities, such as in parts of Zambia where women cannot paddle their boats as it is considered bad over there. The result of these issues, women remain poor and agricultural production cannot reach its potential, perpetuating poverty and hunger in the developing world. Social norms that limit women's opportunities need to be understood and then change. By taking a gender transformative approach, we can influence social norms and bridge the gaps in access to resources and services between men and women in a lasting manner. Change is needed on many levels, and both men and women must be involved for it to happen. Research and development organizations need to invest in programs that promote gender equality alongside improving productivity and income. Policies need to be implemented that increase women's access to services and resources. Communities need to support women as farmers and as leaders. Increasing women's voice and agency is a valuable end in its own right. When development organizations, policies, and communities support the success of women, we have a chance to reduce extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity for girls and boys, women and men around the world.
So we have from the video, we now understand the various. This video that we just watched talked about how gender norms. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Right. So from the video we just watched, you can see that issues of gender inequality in the community is not something that we are born with. We learn it. You can see two children, because of the way the community ascribed roles to them, they grew up to become different persons. You can see how women are denied opportunities. They are not given opportunities because of what? Inequality, gender inequality. So let's now, I think with just that video, it has laid the background of the next few discussions that we are going to have. Let's look at the issue, the next slide, violence. Do we all understand gender, the concepts that I just discussed? Or are there any questions before I proceed? If there are any, type it in the box. I'll go back to look at them and I'll try to answer your questions. Now, what is gender? What is violence? Violence is defined as the intentional use of force, physical force, or power. It may be threatened or actual, so it may be a threat. It may be actual. I may threaten that I'm going to slap you, but I've not slapped you. And then I may actually do it. And violence may be against oneself. Many people think that when you talk about violence, it's against a third party. Violence may be against oneself, it may be against another person, and it may be against a group of persons or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, or maldevelopment or deprivation. So that is the definition of violence: use of actual force, actual physical force, or threatened physical force. When you see, that's why when you see threatened, that is why there is the word psychological harm. You know, threat does not provide any physical pain, but it provides, it leads to psychological pain. All right. Now let's look at the forms of violence and the types of violence. There's a difference typically between forms of violence and types of violence. Whereas type indicates the means that is used to impose or a certain concept of who holds the reign of things. That is, when you talk about type, it means the manner in which you try to use the force, The type of violence vary from sexual, physical, psychological, social, and economic violence. Usually, I use the word impose the concept of who hold the reins. If we are talking about power, you want to show who is in power. So you may decide to use your force, your strength, to show that you are the dominant person. I know you do hear about animals fighting to show their dominance. So we can decide to assert our dominance by using physical force. That is the means that we have used. We can decide to use sexual violence to show dominance, as is usually happen in the cases of rape. You want to show a woman that you are more dominant to her or a child or even another male. You show your dominance by asserting your sexual power. And then, of course, psychological and emotional, you manipulate. And then, of course, there is social. The social happen a lot in our community. See people flexing and feeling like, you see, I know when I talk about imposing or trying to show your dominance socially, you see people trying to dominate people in public spaces by showing that their social status is higher or more than the other. Their importance is more than the other. So they make you feel demoralized, you lose confidence in yourself, and then you do not have self-esteem because of that social dominance they have tried to show over you. And then, of course, there is economic violence. Now, let's look at the forms of violence. The forms of violence indicates the situation in which the violence can happen. For example, so you see, form talks about the situation that the violence can happen. Type of violence talks about what? The means that the violence was perpetrated. So when you talk about violence that occur in family, violence that occur within the community setting, violence that occur in the level of the state. So, for example, now we are talking about a situation, violence that occur in family, we call it domestic violence. Violence that occur in the community is different. Non-intimate partner violence, it may be from any stranger or thereabout. And then we have violence that occur in the state, which is the one that occur in public spaces. So these are the forms of violence. We talk about the situation in which it occur. It may have happened in the office or the community level and so on. So that's the difference between types and form. Type means to impose power. Form, the situation in which the violence took place. Now let's look at this case scenario on types and forms of violence. A woman reports being beaten and humiliated by her husband. The form of violence in this situation is the context in which the violence is occurring. It is defined as intimate partner violence because the situation is between a husband and his wife. Now, so the intimate partner violence or domestic violence, like I said earlier, and then the type of violence is what? Physical violence and psychological and emotional abuse. She's beaten, physical. She's humiliated, psychological, emotional violence. So this example clearly brings out the difference between types of violence and forms of violence. Now I have some few questions here. As I type it on the screen, I'll expect you to, in the chat box, all right, I'll expect you to, in the chat box, type true or false for me. So let's see. GBV is about rape and sexual violence. Gender-based violence is about rape and sexual violence. Please type yes or no. And then gender-based violence can be perpetrated against boys and men too. Okay? Yes. Gender-based violence can be perpetrated. Number 2, please make sure you write the number. Gender-based violence can be perpetrated against boys and men too. Okay, then culture. Culture needs to be always respected, even if it is harmful for girls and women. That we should always respect culture. Number 3, we should always respect culture, even if it's perpetrated, even if it's harmful for girls and women. Is that true or false? Then, of course, number 4, domestic violence is the result of poverty and lack of education. Is it true or false? Domestic violence is the result of poverty and lack of education. Is it true or false? All right, good. Then number 5, if a young woman wears an inappropriate dress, please answer with true or false for me. Number 4, not always. Yes. Number 5, if a young woman wears an inappropriate dress that provokes men sexually, it's her fault to be raped. Number 5, if women wears an inappropriate dress that provokes men sexually, it's her fault to be raped. All right. Consequences of gender-based violence are always the same for all survivors. Number 6, consequences of gender-based violence are the same for all survivors. All right. All right. I've seen 2. Number 6, consequences of gender-based violence are the same for all. Okay, let me go through it so that you know the answer that you put. And gender-based violence is about rape and sexual violence. No, that is false. Gender-based violence can be perpetrated against boys and girls. That's true. Gender-based violence, culture needs to be always respected, even if it is harmful for boys, girls, and women. That's false. Domestic violence is the result of poverty and lack of education. That's false. Lack of is no. If a young woman what she should be blamed, that is false too. And then the consequences of, all right, true. Number one is false. Consequences of GBV are always the same for all survivors. Is false. Now let's go to the next. Many of you got it right. I'm very impressed. Thank you so much. Okay. Now, gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is an umbrella term for any harmful act that is perpetrated against a person's will, based on socially ascribed gender differences between males and females and among females or among males. So if I perpetrate violence against you just because of the fact that you are a male or you are a female, and based on the socially ascribed norms that have been social norms that have been ascribed to you because you're a male or female, I'm committing gender-based violence. It does not matter whether I am a female perpetrating the violence against a female, or I'm a female perpetrating against a male, or I'm a male perpetrating against a female, or I'm a male or a male is perpetrating it against a male. It's gender-based violence. That is why it can be between males and females, or amongst females. You have many women perpetrating violence against other women, gender-based violence against other women, and of course, men too perpetrating violence against each other. Gender-based violence continue. This includes acts that the gender-based violence includes acts that inflict physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering. It also includes threats of such acts. It includes coercion, and it includes deprivation of liberty. For example, the acts can also occur in public and in private. It's not only in private. It can occur in public and in private. Gender-based violence is not confined to only women and girls only, just like we answered in that question. However, they are the most affected group across cultures. Yes, there are men and boys that suffer from gender-based violence. However, because of various cultural norms, religious norms, and several other reasons, women are the most affected. Men and boys, though, can also be survivors of gender-based violence, including sexual violence. Gender-based violence, I want you to know that gender-based violence infringes on a number of universal rights, which are protected by treaties and international agreements. Like, for instance, the Declaration on Human Rights is one of the international instruments that protects all persons irrespective of gender. And we also, irrespective of sex, sorry. We also in Nigeria, in the 1999 Constitution as amended, we have our fundamental rights in the Constitution that protects the rights of everybody, irrespective of whether they're male or female. Everybody's right is protected equally. Many forms of gender-based violence are illegal and are condemned by our national laws and policies. Yes, this is true. If you look at our penal codes and the newly passed Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law and acts at the national level, they protect against all forms of many forms of gender-based violence. So acts of gender-based violence occur without informed consent. So when you hear gender-based violence, it is not with the person's consent. It's usually without the victim's consent. Let's look at types of gender-based violence. We have physical, we have emotional, we have economic, and we have sexual. Now, when you look at physical violence, we have physical assault, we have trafficking, we have slavery, we have infanticide, that is killing of children. We have honor killing and maiming. Honor killing happens when you kill a family member or a member of the community has to kill him or herself to protect the respect or preserve the respect of the family or community. And then when you talk about emotional abuse, we have humiliation, we have abuse, we have confinement, we have isolation, all this works on your emotion and psychology. We have intimidation, we have threat, we have social exclusion, ostracism, and ostracism based on sexual orientation. For instance, when someone is ostracized because of their sexual orientation, we have in Nigeria, it is not acceptable at all in religion and culturally, and even our laws. When you have a male whose sexual orientation is towards other male, people tend to ostracize them. The same way you have a female whose sexual orientation is towards other females, people tend to ostracize them. So when we talk about economic violence, we talk about discrimination or denial of opportunities, forced marriage, early marriage, and denial of education for children, women and children. And therefore, for sexual, we have forced marriage, sexual exploitation, forced prostitution, survival sex, for you to have sex just to be able to survive. And then rape and marital rape, and have child sexual abuse and defilement. So let's look at examples of sexual violence. If you force another person to have sex, if you touch another person sexually against their will, if you use pressure and threats for sexual benefits, forcing another person to commit sexual acts against their will, forcing another person to watch pornography, forcing another person into prostitution, and forcing another person into pregnancy or abortion. These are all parts of sexual violence. Now, physical violence means using of physical strength to impose the authority of the stronger side over the weaker other. If I feel that I'm strong and I use my power over you to try to subdue you in any way, then I'm committing physical violence. Any acts that results in injury, pain, and or discomfort or irritation. So these are all parts of physical violence. For example, breaking, beating, punching or slapping, kicking, burning, and mutilation, using weapons or sharp, harmful objects such as knife, biting, nipping, or squeezing, violently carrying, grabbing, or shaking an individual, strangulation, and twisting of arm or foot. These are all parts of example of physical violence. Then, of course, psychological emotional abuse is the infliction of psychological or emotional pain or harm. These ones you cannot see, so it's usually hard to prove, but you have to bring evidence of circumstantial evidence to prove this kind of violence. These include threat of using violence, maltreatment, insult, verbal or non-sexual, or sexual insulting the individual, and degrading his or her ability, confinement, exclusion of individuals from friends and family, restricting her movements, deprivation of liberty, and so on. Then, of course, stalking. All these things are contained in our new Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law. Then we have unpleasant attention to care. We have prevention for seeking help, criticism, name calling, destroying cherished protection, humiliation, forcing children to take sides in conflicts, especially in marital relations. All these things cause psychological and emotional violence. When you accuse somebody of cheating, when the person is not cheating, just because you want to humiliate the person, then you threaten to abandon somebody and telling them that you can never find somebody like you because maybe you know the person loves you so much. These are all type of emotional violence or psychological violence. We call them emotional blackmail. And sometimes many people use it to hold the other partner, use it to subdue the other partner. And of course, we have socioeconomic violence, which includes denial of resources, opportunities, and services, deprivation of economic rights, and denial of rightful access to economic resources, livelihood, health, and education, and others. This does not include poverty. Poverty is not economic violence. Is when it is we have it and we refuse to, or we deprive a person. For instance, a woman may be well educated, she has the means to work, she has the qualifications, she has the ability to do it, she has the opportunity to go to earn a living, and then all of a sudden, after so many years in school and everything, the woman is now stopped by her husband or her spouse from engaging in any form of labor, even if the employment has been given. This is a kind of socioeconomic violence. So deny another person the opportunity to work and generate income, I just mentioned, in maintaining secrecy concerning household income while depriving the individual of sufficient resources to procure their needs. For example, the money may be there to be able to cater for the family, but you don't want your partner to know how much you earn. You don't want your partner to know the resources that are available. You keep giving meager sums that is not even enough to take care of the household. We've heard of men that give their family 50 naira to buy kaya mia for the whole day. And then they don't come home to eat. They rather stay outside and buy very assorted meats and or salads and other drinks and eat. You see them, they are very healthy, but their wives and children are looking like they are suffering from kwashiorkor. So this is socioeconomic violence. Then controlling the individual spending, confiscating income of an individual. For instance, I heard about Sister Mercy when she was talking yesterday, the facilitator for the day before yesterday, she talked about when you bring your income home and then the man says you should give him the income. You go and earn your hard-earned money and then you bring it home and the man just collects everything. The same thing if you, as a man, you go and earn your money and you bring to, instead of spending it on the family, the woman decides to collect everything and she's giving you just meager amount to take care of yourself. Discrimination in employment opportunities based on gender, injustice in distribution of salaries based on gender. This does not actually usually happen in Nigeria. It happens in the Western world. In Nigeria, everybody, both male and female, when you are engaged, you are paid equally, the same thing as the men. It's different. In the Western world, when you get employed, you have to negotiate for your salary, and as a woman, you have to try to explain why your salary should be the same thing as that of the man. Deprivation of poverty or inheritance rights are also part of socioeconomic violence. Now, let's look at another form of violence. This is harmful traditional practices. This includes deprivation of access to civil, cultural, social, and cultural or political rights. Harmful traditional practices may also involve are forms of violence which have been committed primarily against women. Usually, it's women that suffer from harmful traditional practices more. All right. Especially in certain communities. For instance, if you go to certain communities, you see that is women have to be sexual, they call it female genital mutilation, which of course affects how they give birth, how they, and even the enjoyment of intimacy with their partners. They have problem enjoying it. When they give birth, they have problem, they cannot dilate, so they have to be cut. Sometimes they have to even undergo cesarean section because they cannot be able to give birth naturally because their private organ has been so mutilated that it cannot, the elasticity that comes naturally can no longer come. You know, when a wound heals, it scars, and that place becomes strong. The part of the wound becomes strong than the other skins around it. So the way it is supposed to perform normally, it cannot. If it tries to stretch, it will just tear. That is what happens to most women that have their genital organs mutilated. So, and then in some societies, some harmful traditional practices include the idea of widows being subjected to certain practices when their husbands die. In fact, it's one of the reasons why many families or many communities do not allow their children to marry into other communities, because they are so afraid that when when the husband of the spouse of the woman is no longer there to protect her, the woman will be subjected to various harmful traditional practice. Let me give you one good example. I know that time is going. I'm enjoying this lecture so much. I don't want it to end the time that they have given me, but I have to try and do justice to it. One example of harmful traditional practices is a woman is in a culture that ensures that when a husband dies, the wife is isolated in a hut, an isolated hut. She sleeps on the floor, not on the bed. She sleeps on the floor. And nobody goes to visit her. So the food that she's going to eat, they keep it somewhere, they push it with, a stick, a long pole towards her door. She cannot come out of the room, and she stays there for almost 40 days or even 3 months, mourning her husband throughout the mourning period they are giving her. So she does not eat with any other person. Her food is not cooked in the same pot like other members of the family. She cannot bath. She cannot enjoy any of her God-given rights. She stays there. And the most unfortunate thing is this: at the time she's coming out of the mourning period, she has to come to the marketplace or a public place and bath naked in front of everybody. So you can imagine a woman that be carrying herself like she's one kind of, and then all of a sudden she has to come and bath in front of ruffians in the community, even her children, her grandchildren, people that ordinarily are not supposed to see her aura. They are now seeing her in all her glory. It's very humiliating. And then they have to shave her head, Some even have to, in some communities, that if they suspect that, most communities, when their sons die, they say it's the woman that killed the husband. So they wash the man's corpse and give the woman the water that they used to wash the corpse to drink, on the understanding that if it's the woman that kills the husband, she will die within so number of days. For goodness sake, as a human being, now as a living being, if I bath, or my husband bath and give me the water to drink, will I accept to drink it? Drinking that alone, he's still alive. If I drink it, I know that I may be subject to maybe any type of bacterial, viral infection and everything. I may become sick, And then a corpse, you are washing the body of the corpse that has every type of things, small organisms that you don't even know. You are giving it to the woman. Even the woman did not kill the man. Of course, if she becomes sick, they'll say that she's the one that killed the man. If she did not become sick, they'll still accuse her of something else. This is very, very dehumanizing. These are some practices in most communities. They are phased out, but if you go to the traditional local communities, smaller communities inside, it is still there. I've read some instances of the women coming out to write it, the humiliating experience they have in this day and time. It's quite unfortunate. So these are some of the harmful traditional practices. So these are examples: female genital mutilation, early marriage, child marriage, forced marriage, killing of or neglecting infants based on gender. In some communities, they don't want to take care of their female child because it's a female. Social exclusion and seclusion, deprivation. I remember some communities practicing deprivation of practicing civil, social, and political rights, impeding legislative practices, and depriving individuals of an education based on their gender. These are all part of harmful traditional practices. We are going to look at forms of gender-based violence. The forms of gender-based violence can be divided into 5 settings. Number 1 is a marital setting. Number 2 is the non-marital intimate setting. We have the, of course, social setting, and then we have the 5th one, institutional setting. For example, this institutional setting, an example is when a survivor files a complaint, any response or equity at the police station or court. And there, let me give you an example. A girl goes to the police station and file a complaint that this also person raped her or sexually assaulted her. They'll look at her. Is this the way you were dressed when you were assaulted? Or what were you wearing? What were you doing at that particular time? Violence, gender-based violence happened because she will not be asked that question if she was not a woman. She won't be asked that question. So, because if a man goes to the police and report that he was asked, what were you wearing? What time was that? You know, what took you to his room? They will not ask all those questions. And of course, marital setting are the one that happen between husband and wife. Non-marital intimate setting, we may be spouse, you are not married, maybe partners, maybe intimate partners, so it can happen. And then family setting, we have heard instances that involve the community. So let's proceed. At some other time when we have more time on our hand to be able to look at this topic, the subtopics under this topic more extensively. Gender-based violence is not something you can do within a few hours, talk more of some minutes. Now, understanding GBV, let's look at the exercise, this exercise. They say identify the root causes for gender-based violence and the risk factors that may increase the likelihood of gender-based violence in your context. Very fast in the chat box. Just write one or two. You can just identify one and write the root cause, maybe one root cause of gender-based violence. What is the risk factor of gender-based violence in your context? Then consequences of different forms of gender-based violence like physical, social, etc. This is supposed to be etc. So how are we going to do that?
Excuse me, ma'am. Can they do the discussion on the forum so that it can go beyond the chat? That immediately after they will go back to your portal forum. I will post the questions maybe later in the midnight. Then they can put up their discussions. Then if we have chance, we can go through and communicate and converse further.
All right, no worries. So that's okay. That's okay. Thank you. So when you are doing that assignment, that exercise, I want you to view gender-based violence like this tree that you are seeing on the screen. Now, these leaves here and the branches, look at them as the consequences. So in each of these boxes, you can decide to print each of these. You can decide to print this paper. You can decide to print this figure, this drawing, and then ensure that from here upward, you write the consequences. What are the forms? The forms are on the stem. And then the root causes of all contributing factors, you list them here at the roots. Now, usually when we are doing this exercise, when you are listing the root causes, you can also decide to put what are the things you can do to make it better. Here. And then here, when you are writing on the consequences, when you write the consequences, also ensure that on top of it, you write The consequences, that is what you expect, the outcome you expect when you provide a solution under the root causes. Like if you say one of the root cause is our culture. Now, what is the consequence? How do you, then when you under that culture, what do you want to do to change it? What are the things that can be done to change it? Then you can now put the expected outcome. So this is usually how you are supposed to do the assignment. Now let's look at causes of gender-based violence. They include practices of discrimination between the sexes and society's response. If I discriminate against you and the way the society responds to that discrimination does not punish me or deter me from future discrimination, of course, I'll continue perpetrating the discrimination. So the practice of discrimination between the sexes and the way we respond to it as a society position such discrimination in the society. Placing women and men in roles, like ascribing gender roles and power positions, putting the man there and then the woman down here. Where women are found to be in an inferior status to that of men, this is a root cause of gender-based violence. The accepted gender roles and lack of social and economic value for women and women's work strengthen the assumption that men have decision-making power and control over women. For example, the contribution of women in a family cannot be quantified. However, she is seen as having less decision-making power.
I wanna need mind.
She's seen as having less decision-making power, or she's bringing less to the table. But by the time you quantify all the work she does in the house every day and put a value, a naira value on it, or a money, if she has gone out to give the services she's giving free of charge, she will earn a lot. And if you bring somebody else to come and do those things that she's doing for the family that she's been taking for granted, you may not be able to afford such person because the service she's giving, no one can even give it the way she's giving it. Now, root causes continue. Through acts of gender-based violence, perpetrators seek to maintain privileges, power, and control over others. These unequal power relations and disregard for human rights, gender equality, democracy, and non-violent means to resolve problems exacerbate the state of inequality that leads to gender-based violence. So usually it's disrespect. So let's look at it. We have the root causes here. We have the contributing factors. Wow. So we have power imbalance as one of the root cause. What are the contributing factors to this root cause? And the risk factors: behavioral, alcohol, drugs, boredom, and retaliation. If you are angry, you may decide to retaliate. Then gender inequalities, structural, can't play out access to services. Then disregard for human rights. So we have power imbalance, we have gender inequality, we have disregard to human life. And of course, when we talk about effect, those are some of the causes that I've listed there. When you talk about the effects of gender-based violence causes what? Physical, psychological, and social health problems. It also causes social and economic problems. So it may affect the survivor may be affected physically, behaviorally, and socially. I've seen women that have been abused emotionally so long. In fact, I have one example that I've been following for about 6 years now. She has been abused so long, emotionally, psychologically, more than physically, that now she's termed as mad. In fact, the community says that she has been possessed by a demon. However, medically, she's said to have psychological problem because of emotional abuse. So she has been given some drugs to be taken. Whilst, sometimes she may not take the drug and she'll just be walking around talking to herself. And then, of course, we have issues of health. It can even lead to death. Then we have social and economic effects. Economically, if a person that is being abused or gender-based, that suffer from gender-based violence cannot contribute their quota to the economy, which means if out of the 50% of women, let's say that in Nigeria is made up of 50% men, 50% women. So let's say that then all the 50% men are contributing their quota to the economy. If let's say about 37% of women are suffering from one form of gender-based violence or another, they cannot effectively or efficiently contribute to our economy, which means our economy will suffer from that 37% that are not able to contribute. The effect of this on survivors, family, and dependents. Mostly children suffer from acts of gender-based violence, especially if it is the family type of gender-based domestic violence. Children, broken homes that leads to children becoming streets, living on the streets, and suffering from several types of psychological problems. Then it affects our community too. We cannot develop the way we are supposed to develop because about a half of the community is being marginalized. So you are not willing to look at them equally and bring them to the decision-making platform so that they can contribute their quota. So when you make laws, because they did not contribute to it, you did not take into cognizance how it affects them, and the law will not work properly. If you make a policy because they are not part of the policy-making process, the policy may not work efficiently or have the result that we desire because of what some people's input were not, some of the group, that is, the group in the community has not been consulted during the time that the policy was being put in place. Now, of course, the impact of violence of the perpetrators. Most of the time, when we look at gender-based violence, I think that it's only the survivors that suffer. The perpetrators too suffer. They suffer a lot, and that's why in some communities there is treatment or institutions available to help perpetrators get over that circumstance that make them to perpetrate the type of violence, so that they cannot go back into when they come back to the community, they will be better human beings and they can contribute to the communities better. Consequences of gender-based violence, major obstacles for the achievement of justice, of gender justice. That is, what we are saying is that gender-based violence is an obstacle to gender justice. It also poses serious threat to democratic development and public health. It is a critical barrier to achieving sustainable development and economic growth. All these things, I think I talked about it when we are in the last slide, when I was looking about this effect. I also brought out this. If women, girls, men, and boys are not safe, they cannot be full citizens nor fully participate in the development of their own society. That's what it all boils down to. Now, you can see the type of physical health consequences, psychological health consequences, and social and economic consequences of gender-based violence. When you look at it health-wise, we have physical injury. It may result to HIV/AIDS, for instance, rape, or STD. But STI, sexually transmitted infections. It may lead to unwanted pregnancies, leads to unsafe abortion. Of course, fistula that we are suffering from in this our area here, like as a result of early marriage or child marriage. Now, of course, death may result to death. When you look at the psychological consequences, I've talked about depression that lead to the type of temporary madness. We talk about fear, self-blame, the person will keep blaming themselves, and then constant fear, that is anxiety, mental illness, suicidal thoughts. We've heard of examples of people that have had suicidal thoughts or even gone to as far as implementing that suicidal thought, taking their life because of what? Because of they are suffering from gender-based violence. And then social and economic consequences include victim blaming. That is why many people actually don't come out to report rape or different types of gender-based violence that is perpetrated against them. For instance, yesterday we had a report of a rape of a minor, and when they went to the police station to go and report it, what happened? The father came back and said that, yeah, Naya Femusu, somebody sunche Zamuchi Mutunchi Yarinyana Chigaba the case, go to the police station, Mutunchi, like she's going to be stigmatized. The child will be stigmatized for life. So because of that, he doesn't want his daughter to go through all those type of problems. So you can imagine. And of course, the fear of rejection, isolation, decreased earning capacity and contribution, increased poverty, with risk of victimization. These are all social and economic consequences. Then I think that does justice to, sorry, I'm fast, that just does justice to our lecture on gender-based violence. The next thing we are going to talk about now is we'll see how we can do. I'm reading through your text before we go to effective advocacy. I've seen somebody talking about, oh, okay, that one is for, I've seen somebody asking if the slides can be sent to your WhatsApp groups. I'll discuss with the coordinator to see how we can do it. And we'll attend to other questions later. Let's proceed to effective advocacy. You just finished a lecture on advocacy just now, so I will not go into deeply into it. I will just take a few minutes, like 10 to 15 minutes, to discuss certain things. Now, when you talk about effective advocacy, first you have to look at the meaning of advocacy. I believe you have discussed that in your previous lecture. But when you talk about advocacy, let's look at it from the point of view of advocate. When you say advocate, what does it mean? It means a person that publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. So if I want something and I go and publicly talk about it, I want to bring people to believe in it, and for that policy to be implemented, to be made and implemented, I'm an advocate. So in English language, it's gotten from a medieval word that is a word called to one's aid. When you call somebody to come and help you so that you can make a cause become something public, so that everybody will buy into that idea. So when you talk about effective advocacy, you mix activities that educate people, that persuade, that pressure, that mobilize, monitor people and institutions that can make or block the change. So for you to be effective in advocacy, all these things have to be there. But we are talking specifically about advocacy for women and girls. So I'm going to limit our lecture to just that. Now, who can advocate? Anybody can advocate. So you can advocate, I can advocate. That's why I go about, I advocate a lot. When I see something that I don't like, I speak out about it, and I try to make people see why it's not the way, it's not working, and what we should do to change it. So you can advocate and I can advocate. And then next, what can you advocate about? Anything. You can advocate about anything. So having said that, it's your ability to convince people to believe in you that will make that advocacy effective and successful or not. So for us to be able to effectively advocate for women and girls, we have to do the following, all the things that you see on the screen. The first thing is to understand the problem. You have to understand the problem that is facing women and girls. And how can you do that? To do that, you have to, one, do the first level. Let's look at the advocacy now at 3 levels. And we'll put all these things into the 3 levels. The first level will be like it has to do with education, so that you can understand the problem and set realistic goals and know your audience, Then the second level is the level that will now say, okay, let us engage with the public or the community. And of course, the third level is the policy level. So the education level, to understand the problem that women and girls face, you have to first educate yourself extensively. You educate yourself so that you know, one, what are the rights that everybody as a human being has, irrespective of whether you're a man or you're a woman or you're a boy or you're a girl. Once you understand that, then the next thing, you look around the community and you go and research extensively to know what are the things, are these rights being given to the girls and women? If no, what are the causes, like we discussed? What are the causes? Why are they being denied that rights, those rights? How does it affect them? How does it affect the community? If they are given those rights, how will the community stand to gain from it? So when you're looking about how it affects the women and girls, you have to look at health-wise, psychologically, physically, economically, socially. All these things, you have to look at them and underline them. So when you look at all this, you understand the problem by what? Doing your research, knowing about the topic, knowing about issues that concern women and girls, knowing about it extensively. Go online, do your research. What is trending? What is happening in your community? What is happening in our country, in Nigeria? How was the issue of women and girls in the past? How has it changed now? How is it changing? What is the government doing? What are the policies that are on ground? Are they effective? If they are not effective, where do we need to, where does change need to be effected to? Like, where do we need to change to make sure that maybe the policy or the laws, we need to change them? Do we need to improve them? So when you understand this, and then you go to the world, go to the larger space and understand worldwide, what is the trend? What is going on? What are international laws saying? What are our local laws saying? Then you get to understand about issues of women and girls. Then you now pick one of the problems that you have identified. And then you now set a goal. Because now you know where the problem is. You know your subject matter. You know what you want to achieve. So you have to know what you want to achieve. You have identified the problem and you understand it. So you now set a realistic goal and objective. Let's say, for example, I like using example. Throughout last week, in my advocacy messages, I've been writing about gender-based violence and intertribal marriages. These are things that are observed in the community, and I want to advocate and make it become public so that there may be policy change or community change towards them. Or for instance, I understand the fact that girls, the problem that menstrual hygiene and lack of sexual and reproductive education causes in the community. And I decided, okay, let me pick it up. Who are those that I'm going to work with to make sure it brings about some change? Then I start from there. So that's just, so the first thing is to know, to understand the subject. And that's what we are doing now, this class we are having. Then you set a goal. The next is to know your audience. Is that when you know your audience, you'll be able to now go to the next level of engaging with your audience. When I say know your audience, you should know those that are sympathetic to your cause. When you identify the cause you want to fight for, the cause that concern women and girls that you want to fight for, you have to know those that are sympathetic to that cause. For instance, the last facilitator talked about maybe if you want to approach a legislator, maybe you find out that the legislator was somebody who's in the family, the mother and the family really help him to contribute to who he is today without any outside help. So you'll be sympathetic to issues that concern women. So you have to know your audience. Are they sympathetic towards the cause? Then you have to know those that are apathetic. They don't care whether it doesn't make any difference to them. Then there are those that are antagonistic to the cause. So for each of these three group of people, there's a way you have to prepare towards them. For those that are sympathetic to the cause, yes, you go and meet them, you have your everything, you explain to them, that's okay. For those that are apathetic, you have to think of ways to make them to start believing in the cause, to take a stand. And then for those that are antagonistic to the cause, you have to bring a lot of facts to convince them, because you know that when you are meeting them, they have 10,001 argument to counter anything you bring to the table. So you should be very ready and prepared for them. That is what knowing your audience will be. There are people that immediately you just say gender-based violence, they don't even want, no, just say gender. They don't want to hear. Immediately you say gender, they just feel that it's all about women. Whereas gender is not all about women. It encompasses all the sexes. We are talking about ascribed roles. We are not talking about women, only women or only men. It cuts across the sexes. So you have to know. Then you have to understand the challenges, of course, you are going to face. I know the just immediate facilitator talked about the challenges, so I'm not going to go into that. But it's when you understand your challenges that you now develop your strategy. When I'm talking about strategy, I mean the target. You have to know your target. Is it a small group of people? Is it intimate set? Is it your friends? Is it are there like, are you going to the politicians, the legislators? That is maybe an elite few, or are you going to the general public? So it's different ways that you approach that.